Remember where you are. This is Thunderdome. Death is listening, and we'll take the first man that screams.
What are you trading?
I'm looking for someone.
You got anything to trade or not?
He was driving a team of camels.
People come here to trade. If you find him, what then?
I'll ask him to return what's mine.
Oh, and of course he'll be desperate to clear his conscience.
He will be.
A warrior, aren't you? Lost everything. Looking for a deal.
But he's just a raggedy man. Look around, mister. All this I built. Where there was desert, now there's a town. Where there was robbery, there's trade. I'll do anything to protect it. Have a look.
I see a big guy giving a little guy a piggyback.
Master Blaster. They're a unit.
The little one is called Master. He's the brains.
Me order, me master.
He runs underworld. Together they can be very powerful. We want to keep the brain, dump the body.
Who's the waiting ones?
Waiting for what?
Waiting for you?
Who do you think I am? That ain't me. You got the wrong guy.
Quick, Josh and Captain.
Hey, catch the wind.
We gotta see tomorrow, Marlene.
Remember this?
Now, there were places like these, cities. They were called cities. Now, there's lots of them. This happened. This porky eclipse happened, and it's all finished. It just isn't there anymore. I want my camels, my vehicle, food, water, methane. Huh?
Deal.
Okay, you said a fair fight. What do you mean by that?
As provided by the law.
Thunderdome.
Dying times here.
Is it all or nothing?
Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome smashed its way onto the big screen on the 10th of July in the USA and arrived in the UK on the 18th of October in 1985. The third entry in the franchise had the backing of Warner Brothers, who funded the film with a $12 million budget, the biggest given to director George Miller for his Mad Max series that started way back in 1979. But this time George wouldn't be directing it by himself, with George Ogilvy assisting him with this epic production. With Warner Brothers involved in the film, it would be seen by fans as being Hollywoodized, as the third film shifts to a lighter tone, and with Tina Turner involved in the cast, resulting in a couple of songs being produced, the film gained more of a mass market appeal. The film would prove successful at the box office, earning $36 million in the USA alone. It's unclear how much it pulled in worldwide, but it wasn't as successful as Mad Max 1 and 2, especially in Australia. The film would thankfully earn a big chunk of money when it hit home video. The reviews were mixed, with fans being disappointed that Max was no longer a nihilistic hero, but appears to have come to terms with his past and is driven to save the children. He takes on a more relaxed persona and speaks far more than he ever did in Mad Max 2. The fans were impressed, however, with the larger world Max inhabited and the production values. With the fans being unsure with its change in direction, a number of critics were impressed with Beyond Thunderdome. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert on the show At the Movies both gave it a thumbs up. Gene said it was a great, violent, fun picture. Roger was overwhelmed by the wealth of new ideas introduced into the film, and not being a fan of sequels, was desperate to see a fourth one. He loved the movie so much he rated it 4 stars out of 4 in the Chicago Sun-Times, and put it on the list of his best movies of 1985, saying it was the best of the Road Warrior movies. Critic James Olsen of Starburst magazine said, "Fans of the riveting rollercoaster action and burlesque brutality of Mad Max 1 and 2 are likely to be disappointed by the latest film's more measured, thoughtful approach. The high-octane thrills of the former films have been tempered by broader humour, a more elaborately designed look, and most significantly, a more expansive, involving storyline." Mel Gibson is also allowed to breathe some life and sympathy into the character of Max, who has recovered somewhat from his heart-hardened past. If Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome doesn't live up to the pace and power of its predecessors, its richer visual style and more substantial storyline and characterizations are a welcome, if not wholly successful, change in emphasis. Cinefantastique magazine, who are often very hard to please, awarded it 2 out of 4, saying the gladiatorial combat in the Thunderdome will become an instant classic. The film slows in spots, however, especially when Gibson comes across a tribe of children awaiting the arrival of a messiah. A satisfying blend of story, action and design make this a winner. Beyond Thunderdome wouldn't bring on a wealth of merchandise. The co-writer Terry Hayes said it would be out of character, and their primary audience wouldn't be interested in action figures. George Miller saw Beyond Thunderdome as the final in the series, and seemed to have said goodbye to the post-apocalyptic wasteland of Mad Max at the time, and moved on to completely different projects. Talk of a 4th movie would rumble into the background for years, with many false starts during the late 90s, and things began to move forward with Mel Gibson returning, but the production was shelved again, but would be awakened in 2015 with Mad Max Fury Road with Tom Hardy in the lead, with the long-awaited sequel taking everyone by surprise, pleasing old and new fans of the character, and it firmly put the veteran director George Miller at the top, as one of the best action directors around, putting all his competitors to shame. After Mad Max 2, George Miller was getting a lot of attention, the sequel was a massive hit, and George had a lot of opportunities thrown his way, getting the chance to work on the Twilight Zone movie alongside producers Steven Spielberg and John Landis, directing the segment Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which was a fan favourite from the classic series, which was originally directed by the late Richard Donner. He directed and wrote an episode of the TV series The Dismissal, working with George Ogilvy and Terry Hayes. Around this time, George was getting asked if Mad Max 3 was in the works, as having worked with Spielberg on the Twilight Zone, some journalists even threw around the idea that he was rumoured to direct Raiders 2, before it would become the Temple of Doom. He denied any rumours attached to Indiana Jones, and even a third Mad Max, but he was clearly keeping any ideas of a third movie close to his chest. In July 1983, Byron Kennedy, who was a key component in the Mad Max series, having produced the first 2 and contributed to the creation of Max, was tragically killed at the age of 33 when the helicopter he was piloting crashed. George was deeply upset and struggled with the idea to move forward without his producing partner, as his plans to make Mad Max 3 were already in motion, saying later, "I was reluctant to go ahead, and then there was a sort of need to, let's do something just to get over the shock and grief of all of that." There is a title card at the end of the film that reads, "For Byron." George formed a new team to help him continue Max's story. Terry Hayes, who had written the novelisation of Mad Max, impressed Miller with his work, and he was hired to help with the screenplay of Mad Max 2. Terry and George had been exploring ideas for the third film, with Miller wanting to take Max in a different direction. Terry discussed his ideas of a tribe of kids that embodied the heart of the story and the hope for survival with George over dinner in a restaurant, and George was excited by the direction. In further meetings to refine the story over 18 months, Miller started discussing quantum mechanics, the theory of the oscillating universe, recalls Hayes, and what would shape a third Mad Max film. Max's universe was oscillating, with the future now retreating deeper into the past, with Miller letting his myths roam, envisioning an epic framework, a grand dystopia, and with petrol no longer available, the new power source methane has become the most desired. Miller wanted to pursue a fully redemptive arc for Max, with Max seen as a somewhat of a messiah, unable to prevent himself from doing the right thing. From the August issue of Starburst from 1985, Terry Hayes said in an interview, "It's a much more generous film, I think, than the second one. At the beginning of the second, Max was a closet human being. At the end, he had sort of come out of his closet and recognised that he could be touched by human emotion. This film, number 3, is the resurrection of him as a man. He admits to himself that he is capable of caring again. The trick has been to integrate this with the elements that have worked in the other 2 Max movies. It's in the style of the other 2 with the car action and chases in it. It would be silly to divorce it totally from that audience. Terry wasn't a fan of extreme violence, but you couldn't politely steal someone's car in the world of Mad Max," Terry explained in the original making of. So the violence was unavoidable, but a strict view on the harsher side of action was taken with the new film. But for entertainment for those living in this bleak future, the Thunderdome would be ideal. Instead of going to war, they would fight it out to the death like a form of theatre, which has happened throughout history. Miller would find himself distracted throughout the production, wanting to seek approval or advice from Kennedy, only to be reminded he was gone. So in efforts to avoid too much on his plate, he brought on director George Ogilvy to co-direct the picture. Ogilvy was celebrated as a director of theatre, ballet and opera. He'd got to know Miller directing episodes of The Dismissal and Bodyline. Ogilvy would focus on working with the actors, and Miller would focus on the action and setting. Miller would assist actors with motivation when asked, and would be on set with Ogilvy to supervise. With this process, it would take a lot of pressure off his shoulders, because Miller was still grieving for his friend. For the cast, we have Mel Gibson returning as Mad Max. Throughout the film, he has a dilated left eye, from the wounds he received from Mad Max 2. Gibson off-screen was struggling being a celebrity and had issues with alcohol that would cause problems for him later in life. After Thunderdome's release, he was the first to be voted sexiest man alive by People magazine. As he said goodbye to Mad Max, he would become well known as Martin Riggs, starring in 4 Lethal Weapon films that kick-started in 1987. Tina Turner plays Auntie Entity, the ruler of Bartertown. George Miller, in his search for Auntie, felt they had to be a positive character rather than a conventional evil bad guy. Miller and Hayes had worked on the script with Tina Turner in mind, but they had no idea if she would be interested. But thankfully, she was eager to take the part. Tina had been offered many roles throughout her career, but this genre certainly appealed to her. Her outfit, which was all chainmail, weighed over 70 pounds. Bruce Spence plays Jedediah, who pilots a small plane with his child Jedediah Jr., played by Adam Cockburn. Jedediah steals stolen goods and trades them with Bartertown. Bruce played the gyro captain in Mad Max 2, confusing the fans. Was this the same character? They are both pilots, but he has a different name. George Miller insisted that Spence's Jedediah was a new character. This was an example to add to many that continuity was never a major concern for Miller. Frank Thring plays the Collector, who runs the trading network of Bartertown. Frank had come from theatre before making the leap to film. He was best known for his performance in Ben-Hur and King of Kings, recognised by his cold blue eyes and his voice that made him a fantastic character actor. Angelo Rosito plays the Master, a little person who has the technical expertise to build the methane extractor responsible for Bartertown's electricity. Angelo starred in Freaks from 1932 and The Wizard of Oz. Blaster is played by Paul Larson, Master's hulking bodyguard carrying him on his shoulders. His head is concealed in a diver's helmet. Paul didn't have much of an acting career, appearing in Altered States and the kidnapping of the President before securing his role in Mad Max 3. Australian rock star Angry Anderson plays Ironbar, the head of Bartertown security, and is basically the new Wes, who was played by Vernon Wells. Anderson said in the official making-of featurette, "I fell in love with Mad Max, tragically from the first movie. He didn't care much for films, but he cared about Mad Max, pursuing a role as soon as a sequel was announced, and luckily he and Miller were friends." Another rock star had pursued a part in the film, and that was Billy Idol, but I'm unsure why that didn't work out. Robert Grubb plays Pig Killer, a convict in Bartertown sentenced to shovel pig feces in the methane refinery for the crime of killing a pig to feed his children. Robert had graduated from drama school at the same time as Mel. Robert starred alongside Mel in the very popular 1981 film Gallipoli, directed by Peter Weir. George Spartels plays Blackfinger, the head mechanic in Underworld. His character would be very similar to the mechanic from Mad Max 2, played by Steve Spears. Edwin Hodgman plays Dr. Dealgood, Bartertown's flamboyant auctioneer and judge. Edwin, like many of the cast, came from theatre, a versatile actor who had studied Shakespeare, musical theatre and cabaret. Helen Bidet plays Savannah Nix, one of the oldest members of the tribe. This was her feature film debut. Helen was also a trained singer. She had a handful of roles on TV and film, but her career was more defined by her performances in theatre. Rod Zuanik plays Screwloose, who doesn't speak and is alienated from the tribe. Screwloose has the ability to replicate anyone else's skills, including driving a vehicle. His makeup design would be borrowed and used in Fury Road for the look of the War Boys. And last but not least, we have Tom Jennings playing Slake, the strongest and oldest member of the tribe, making him the alpha male. He stays at the Oasis as Max and the others leave to find the rest of the tribe. Tom would have a few more roles on TV, but seemed to have retired from acting in 1992. Filming started in September of 1984 and lasted for 5 grueling weeks in the heat, under the working title Desert World to hide the production. They made use of 3 key locations around New South Wales and southern Australia. Bartertown would be set in Homebush Bay, which was a famous place for where many of the bricks were made to build Sydney, and was later known for the illegal street racing that took place there in the 70s. The mining town of Cooper Pedy was used as the desert backdrop, and the children's home was located at Mermaid's Cave in the Blue Mountains. According to cinematographer Dean Semler, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome proved far more challenging than Mad Max 2. We were dealing with more varied environments than before, and it was essential that each of the worlds created for the film have a distinctively different look. The Mad Max series has a lot of love from car enthusiasts, but George Miller and Terry Hayes weren't that obsessed, unlike the late Byron Kennedy. Terry didn't like the idea that the cars in Mad Max 2 looked like street cars, so for number 3 he wanted a look that the vehicles had grown out of the environment, taking on a more reptilian look. The production was taken to the High Court on the suspicion that Pig Farm was a hotbed for transmissible diseases. The city of Sydney made bizarre claims that pig urine could jump 2 feet into the air and be absorbed into the atmosphere. The production had to guarantee that the pigs were comfortably housed beneath air filters and deodorizers. The stunt coordinator Grant Page, who recently worked on Furiosa and sadly died this year due to a car accident, handled the extensive car chases in Thunderdome while battling the extreme heat. In an interview with Page, his main concern was the lack of padding on the drivers. It was too hot. Normally in a cool temperature you pad yourself with wetsuits and all sorts of things until you are so well protected that you won't get hurt, said Page. But out in over 50 degrees Celsius heat, you can't do that because you'd last 3 minutes and you'd be dead. Director George Miller, who went to medical school and knew how to deal with working in high temperatures, told the crew to avoid alcohol as it would make you dehydrated. But many of the crew didn't listen and they had over 10 crew members passing out due to heat exhaustion. The big chase on the train track was a real one in operation, so they had to stop production for trains to pass before they could continue filming. For the middle act featuring the kids of the Lost Tribe, they only had them for 2 weeks. They had 52 in total after 1,800 kids and teenagers had auditioned. The cast of kids were made up of musicians, gymnasts and actors. Mad Max 3 wouldn't make use of big visual effects that would require extensive opticals, but it does make use of miniatures and one matte painting that would appear during the moment Savannah finds Max and calls out to her tribe, and you can see a giant crack in the earth. This matte painting was produced by Sid Dutton while he was working for Universal City Studios. The cameraman Bill Taylor said it was a tricky shot to composite the small shot of the actress into it without matte lines showing. The miniatures make their appearance near the end as a tribe along with Jedediah fly over the ruins of Sydney. We see the Opera House and the bridge. This sequence was supervised by Dennis Nicholson and produced by a team of model makers. From the photos you can see the fantastic detail and scale of these miniatures, but what turns up on film is quite short and slowed down with this juddery frame rate. What had transpired was that they shot the miniatures outside and blasted it with Fuller's Earth to create these dust clouds, but they couldn't achieve the desired backdrops of a sunrise, and after many weeks of trying they shot it indoors 8 months later with a giant painted backdrop. The models and some of the cars were displayed in a motor show in Sydney in 1985, but due to the miniatures being so large to put into storage, they were sadly destroyed. Months before its release, the film was known as Mad Max 3. Through all the early interviews and press coverage, many referred to it as that, and an early teaser featured the number 3 logo, but it was decided that Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome would be the official title. For the film's story, which is set 15 years after the events of Mad Max 2, we find Mad Max wandering the desert with his car out of action and all his belongings on a camel wagon. The airborne bandit Jedediah and his son steal his wagon and his possessions. Max follows the trail and stumbles across a place called Bartertown. The bustling town is built on trade. He is initially refused entry, but Max impresses the collector, and he is introduced to the founder and ruler of the town, Auntie Entity, and she offers to resupply him if he completes a task for her. The underworld of Bartertown is ruled over by Master Blaster. Master Blaster has begun to challenge Auntie for control of Bartertown. If he doesn't get his way or if he is displeased, he has the ability to shut off the power. Auntie wants Max to kill Blaster so she can take full control. Max infiltrates Underworld to see if he can take out Master Blaster, but Master learns his newly acquired vehicle belongs to Max. He forces Max to disarm its booby trap. In doing so, Max sets off the alarm and discovers that Blaster is hypersensitive to high-pitched noises. Max escapes and returns to Entity to make his deal, and by law of Bartertown he has to challenge Blaster to the death in Thunderdome. Max is losing to Blaster but remembers that Blaster is sensitive to sound and blows a whistle he had hidden on him, which disables Blaster. Max knocks his helmet off and prepares to kill him, but upon seeing that Blaster has learning difficulties, he refuses to harm him. Auntie's head of security, Ironbar, takes action and kills Blaster. Auntie gains control and Max is punished for breaking his deal, and he is sent into the wasteland. His horse collapses and so does Max once he frees himself. He is later discovered by a warrior girl, who takes him back to her home, where Max meets the tribe of children and teenagers who are searching for a man called Walker, who looks like Max. They believe he can fly them away to Tomorrowland. Max has come to terms with his new responsibilities to save these children and returns to Bartertown. The score to Mad Max 3 would be handled by Oscar-winning French composer Maurice Jarre, replacing Brian May, no, not that Brian May, who had provided the fantastic scores to Mad Max 1 and 2. Maurice started his career way back in 1952 and scored many big movies throughout his career with Dr. Zhivago, Alfred Hitchcock's Topaz, Enemy Mine, A Passage to India, The Mosquito Coast, and the one he is best known for, Lawrence of Arabia. From the liner notes of the soundtrack, Maurice's involvement with the score had a few detractors. One was fellow composer Bruce Smeaton, speaking as president of the then newly formed Australian Guild of Screen Composers. After Maurice began writing in Sydney, the Guild petitioned Prime Minister Bob Hawke to withdraw Maurice's work visa and to deny the film tax concessions as punishment for Miller's replacement of Australian-born Brian May, but nothing came of this. Warner Brothers had decided they wanted a more high-profile composer attached, thus resulting Brian May being dropped. What many people remember about the film are the two songs by Tina Turner. We Don't Need Another Hero, which reached number 2 in the singles charts in the USA and number 3 in the UK, which played out during the end credits, and One of the Living opened the film, which didn't reach the top 10 charts at the time. The music video for We Don't Need Another Hero was directed by George Miller, and it features Beefcake Tim Capello on saxophone, and Tim would feature in the One of the Living music video as well, though I don't think Miller directed that video, but it would feature clips from the film. I love the song We Don't Need Another Hero, superbly written and composed. It's very 80s with the saxophone, which I adore, and when the chorus of kids join in, it becomes this epic song. The late Tina Turner had such a powerful voice and a master of key changes, and it shines through in this song. Some fans may see this as commercial bollocks, George Miller sold out, etc., but there's no denying how good this song is. The original album arrived on CD, LP and tape, including 26 minutes of Maurice's work. The remaining tracks were dedicated to Tina Turner's songs, with the two featured, plus an instrumental version of Who Needs Another Hero. The soundtrack would get reissued on CD in 1992 and again in 2003. Though these re-releases wouldn't contain any new tracks until it was finally remastered in 2010 by Tadlow Music, which had Maurice's full score totaling over 2 hours worth of music, including tracks that were dropped and replaced by Tina Turner's songs, though Tina's music wasn't included in this new edition due to licensing rights. This remaster has been out of print for years, and probably fetches silly prices on the second-hand market. If you loved composer Brian May's work on the previous 2 films, then you may be disappointed with the change of direction for the music. May's work did differ from Mad Max 1 to the sequel, but the sound he created for this post-apocalyptic world was very unique, and a highlight of those films, especially Mad Max 2. So I was a bit gutted when I realised they changed composers. But there is no denying that Maurice Jarre is an incredible composer and brings a lush score to this world that has a mix of choruses, electronic cues, jazz and big operatic pieces that provides a creative blend of styles that feels inspired by the works of John Barry and John Williams. The music cues for the Thunderdome sequence feel straight out of Ben-Hur or Spartacus. With this wide variety of musical styles, it doesn't quite find its voice like Mad Max 2. I think mainly down to the clearly 3-act structure the story has. The music has to make these big sweeping changes to fit the tone and shift in direction, making it more of a challenge for the composer to make the score consistent. The only part of the score I don't care for is the music for Bartertown. It's just this repetitive clanging sound of metal that gets irritating very quickly. Overall, it's an impressive score and very classical in its approach, but it lacks the hard edge of Mad Max 2, which set the groundwork for this bleak future. As a kid, the Mad Max film that made me aware of the franchise was Beyond Thunderdome. It was frequently on TV at sensible times of the evening to watch, unlike Mad Max 2, which would be on late for those of an older age. And the Tina Turner song was very familiar to me, being played frequently on the radio. So I do have some nostalgia for it, but it was often noted as the weakest of the trilogy. Over the coming years, I saw Mad Max 1 and 2 and understood why some of the fans would favour the others instead of Thunderdome. But it's interesting that the critics were impressed with Mad Max 3 at the time, and some felt it was the best of the trilogy. From the start, you're introduced to Max not in a car and instead wandering the desert with camels. You're introduced to Bartertown, showing you for the first time a sense of world building not seen in Mad Max 2. Sure, we are introduced to new characters and the film sets about introducing you to the world destroyed by war, but now for the third film this future doesn't seem so barren. There's a lot more going on, and there was more for Max to explore. There seems to be a sense of order and control restored as thousands approach the town as Max joins them. By the way it's shot and composed, it feels like something you'd see in a biblical epic from the 1950s. We are so used to Max being a man of few words, but he has come out of his shell and is far more communicative than ever before, and once he approaches the collector and introduced to Auntie, we are witnessing a man who has changed over time, no longer seemed haunted by the demons of his past, now spotting long hair and grey streaks, but still wearing his classic outfit. Max's main goal in The Road Warrior was all about securing gas. That's all he needed. We never knew where he was going, he just wanted to be left alone. And in Thunderdome he seems to be of the same attitude. He just wants his stuff back that was stolen so he can return to his travels across the wasteland. He then gets involved with Auntie and her crew and is forced to battle in Thunderdome, which only plays a small part in the movie, despite all the marketing and the change in the film's title. It is, however, the most iconic moment, and when people remember Mad Max 3, they often recall this sequence. The action for the battle between Blaster and Max is inspired, as they have these bungee cords strapped to them as they bounce around the dome, with Mel doing a lot of his own stunts, creating an exciting action scene as he avoids the various spikes as he clings to the dome. Once Max realises he can't kill Blaster, as he has the mind of a child, which shows that Max still has a strong moral compass, then Ironbar does the deed himself. It's an emotional little moment as Master is distraught. And the audience show respect for Max for not taking action, as Auntie has no choice but to punish him despite arguing the laws set in Bartertown. As Max busts the deal, he must face the wheel. Once Max is thrown into the desert as punishment, the horse carrying him dies as he makes his way by himself but soon succumbs to the heat. The imagery here was totally ripped off by Fist of the North Star. Well, the whole look of the film would inspire the comic and animated series. Max is discovered by Savannah of the Lost Tribe of Children, and this is where the movie takes a sharp left turn. Many people's complaint is when Max encounters the children, but I never disliked this sequence. It is Lord of the Flies with a mix of the Lost Boys of Peter Pan. It's the first time we see plants and wildlife, a utopia so to speak. It's the shift in tone that feels so out of place in this series. It's lighter and playful with its music, it becomes this family-friendly movie. It's very different compared to Mad Max 1 and 2. Once Max tells them he is not Captain Walker who was supposed to fly them away to Tomorrowland, Max has to bring them back down to reality and tells them the truth, which is where it tells you for the first time that the world was destroyed by nuclear warfare. Number 2 gives you a bit of a prologue, but it's not clear that nuclear war caused its issues. It highlights a war between two tribes, and the lack of fuel brought the world to a standstill, causing years of chaos. After learning the truth, not all of the kids believe him, and decide to head out to find Tomorrowland with or without him. Max is not happy and doesn't want them to leave, as they will encounter Bartertown, and he actually knocks out Savannah, showing his dark side. This moment to keep her from leaving is a bit unwarranted, and not the Max we've seen so far in this film, but Savannah and a group of kids leave during the night, and he is warned the following morning. He is not happy and goes searching and finds them in serious trouble, and comes to the rescue. This is what Miller and the writer wanted to show you, that Max has discovered his humanity. You could see him as his messiah figure throughout the film. He has wandered out of the desert to help those in need. There are visual elements to suggest that, but it's more defined by Max after losing his wife and child, and has come to terms with his past. He now realises he's best served helping others, and getting back to Bartertown may be the only way to get those kids away from danger. The Mad Max films are primarily known for their high-speed action and intense car chases, etc. So anyone wanting a lot of action in Mad Max 3 will find themselves being a bit disappointed, as once Max takes part in the Thunderdome and is left out in the desert, we don't see any form of action until he escapes from Bartertown with Master and the kids, as their explosive escape leads to what fans come to expect from the series, a big car chase. Though instead of a big truck pulling a gas tank, they make their way to freedom on a train with a property strapped to it, as Auntie chases after them. What transpires is a great sequence that is nicely staged, but kind of lacks the thrills of the final conflict in The Road Warrior. What I really like about the film is the inclusion of more comedy. Jedediah Jr. is hilarious as he tries to hold them up at gunpoint, but then spots Auntie and her gang pursuing them. Max making fun of Master for living in shit. Master points out Underworld provides energy and Max says yeah, it still smells like shit. Seeing him fight Auntie's henchmen and one gets hit in the face by a table, and the Collector is whacked in the nuts. It does get very slapsticky with its humour. It's kind of like Buster Keaton with its stunts, especially with Ironbar narrowly avoiding being hit off the train multiple times. I think the biggest issue with Thunderdome is that it's stuffed with too many ideas. Too many characters that all play a part in the story, and it's not a long movie. It's the perfect length for an action film at 1 hour and 45 minutes or so, but that runtime is ideal if the story is straightforward. Like the other films, they are simple stories that provide enough to warrant the runtime, whereas Thunderdome would have been perhaps served better either dropping the kids' subplot or having them locked up in Bartertown as he has to free them, or the final act takes place at the Oasis as Auntie and her crew find the hidden paradise and come to take it for their own. But then you don't have an epic car chase to include, though in its current form when the chase does happen, it does feel like it's crowbarred into the film to satisfy the fans. I don't think anyone hates Beyond Thunderdome. I think it's firmly in the camp of being slightly disappointing, and doesn't meet the expectations of what fans and general moviegoers had come to expect from the series, but you can argue George Miller wasn't just going to repeat himself again despite the fans complaining of its shift in direction. It does have many positive elements. The production design is superb, with the costumes being more refined and clear, with their different factions between the people in power and the ones in extreme poverty. There's lots of retrofitting to make the world appear that it was built out of rubbish and discarded parts. Waterworld would borrow heavily from this film for its visual style and production design. The cast is superb, Mel is surrounded by many fantastic character actors, and Mel himself is on top form and looks his best out of the trilogy. They make interesting efforts to make small changes to his clothes throughout the film. They very much fit each location. It works so well from the first shot we see of him to the final conflict with Auntie. Tina Turner is great throughout the film. It's interesting to know that she hadn't acted before and didn't really pursue it afterwards. She hits the emotional beats well and shows she can rule Bartertown without fear of the populace turning against her. But she isn't your traditional villain, which was intentional. By the end, she respects Max and doesn't hurt him when he is clearly outnumbered. She has good traits to her personality and isn't two-dimensional like you'd find in a generic action film. There was a lot going on with her. I wish the film explored that more, but it gets too busy to fully flesh her out. But what we are given is fine, but maybe more of a conflict between her and Max, or perhaps there was some sort of emotional connection between them, but more of them together on screen would have been ideal. For those who aren't that familiar with the series, or aren't that fussed about big epic car chases and want something different, then Thunderdome will certainly appeal to them. It does feel a lot more commercial with its attempts to grab a wider audience, which I don't think the fans wanted, but with a budget of over $10 million back in 1985, you can't take that many risks that could jeopardise it not making its money back and then some. At the end of the day, all the Mad Max films are really enjoyable. One may be better than the other, but they are all well directed, entertaining, and depending on the mood you are in, you can pick one of them and not feel lost, as the original trilogy and Fury Road don't really require you to watch them in order. As mentioned, continuity between them all is a bit muddled. Thunderdome may be lacking in areas, but it makes up for it by giving you a larger, more detailed world that Fury Road would follow with its direction. And it's full of interesting characters, but it is missing some of the aggression and intensity that defined the series so early on. But putting those issues aside, it still delivers on providing enough entertainment, some good comedy and adventure. Plus it has Tina Turner belting out a fantastic song, We Don't Need Another Hero, probably one of my favourite songs produced for a movie from the 1980s. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to click the like button and hit the bell to be notified of my latest reviews. Big thanks to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain access to exclusive videos and take part in Q&As, follow the link below.